Our next storyteller is also new to anecdotal evidence, but not new to weaving tales and telling us all about the weird stuff her kids do. So I'm very, very happy to welcome our very own Jack Bauer, Cheryl Bledsoe. All right, I'm Cheryl Bledsoe, and I'm an emergency manager here for Clark County. So if you've heard anything over the last couple of days about the disaster drills that are happening in and around the Portland metropolitan area, I'm pretty much responsible for most of them. So the good news is, however, I'm the crazy parent that Jordan just talked about, that still has the safety locks, that makes sure her kids wear a backpack to school, that has all of the contact information for everyone in our family in case they get lost. But today I'm going to tell you a story about my daughter's recent adventures into memorizing the Bible. And so I had to bring a prop. She's the adorable 8-year-old that I'm now going to be scheduling my trip to Bangkok about shortly, after this is over. But she was approached by a pastor in our church and said, you know, we're going to do an awesome thing in our church where all the leadership team memorizes a chapter in the book of James. And I thought, well, that's really good. What I remember about James as a kid is James was about, learning how to tame your tongue, talking appropriately, and I thought this would be a great lesson for her. Now, unfortunately for me, the pastors gave her the option of choosing which chapter in the Bible in the book of James that she would memorize. So she went home and she looked at it, and her math said, I'm going to choose the shortest chapter in the Bible. So she chose James chapter 4. So I kept asking her, I said, have you been studying? Oh yeah, I've been studying, Mom, it's great. And we're sitting around the dining room table one day, and I'm working on some work stuff, and she turns to me and says, Mom, I've got a question for you, so I'm trying to memorize this book. What is lust? And I paused and said, what are you reading, honey? And she said, I'm memorizing my chapter in the Bible, Mom. And so I said, well, lust is when you really want something and you can't really have it. And so she was okay with that answer. She's a literal 8-year-old, so she's okay with, literal answers. And then she turns to me and says, well, what's adultery, Mom? And I said, well, your dad's sitting on that couch right there. Why don't you ask him? He turned to me and said, I have to go leave the room for a minute. So I said, well, why don't you give me some context for what it is that you are trying to do? So she reads the verse, adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Now I'm sitting there thinking, what on earth am I going to do to explain this verse to an 8-year-old? She's literal, like you can't have friends anymore. I don't really understand how to explain this to you. So I said, well, what do you think adultery means? She said, I have no idea, Mom. That is why I'm asking you. So I said, well, let's think about this for a minute. Let's try to problem solve. So, your dad and I are married. So yes, I know you're married. What does that have to do with it, Mom? I said, well, it would sort of be like, what if your dad and I had additional boyfriends or girlfriends? So then she said, I said, well, what if your mommy had some additional boyfriends? I probably shouldn't do that because I'm married to your dad. And she goes, well, what about Uncle Mark? And what about Uncle Dale? And all the men in my life that she thinks that maybe I'm also married to. Now, I've grown up with a lot of men in my life. I work in a profession that is pretty much all very male-dominated, unfortunately. And so there's a lot of men in my life. They're not all my husband, of course. But we explained that to her, and she was okay with the answer that I'm not married to those men in my life. So they're not staying overnight. So we got past that hurdle, and I waited until Friday night. She had some friends over to the house, and she had a couple of girlfriends over, and later that next day, the parents call me. Now the parents call me, and they say, and the parents, by the way, happen to be best friends of ours who are also pastors at another church. So they call me and they said, our daughters were at your house last night. They're age 8 and age 10. And they apparently had some type of conversation about lust and adultery. And we weren't quite ready to have those conversations with our kids yet, so we're kind of wondering what your daughter might have said to them about lust and adultery. I said, well, here's the explanation I gave. Have you heard the answer of what she told her friends? Because I'm sitting there thinking, how does this story kind of translate? You've all played the game telephone. Mommy has lots of boyfriends at the house, and I'm not quite sure fact that we were memorizing the Bible and it was okay, and somehow we were all right with that. So fast forward to the next day, which is Sunday. We're on our way to church, and my daughter says, Mommy, I figured out something in my Bible. There's these little numbers that have footnotes. And so I figured out that this number sends me to another Bible passage, which happens to be in Matthew. And I want to read it to you, and I need you to explain it, Mommy. So you've heard that it said of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that whoever looks at a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it's more profitable that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, cast it from you. For it's more profitable that one of your members perish than your whole body to be cast into hell. Furthermore, it's been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you, whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery too. And whoever marries a woman is divorced commits adultery. Now, my daughter has so many friends that have friends that have been divorced that, her first answer to me, and I'm sitting there thinking we're driving to church, and I'm like, what is the first of these Anne's questions, right? So the first question she asks is, Mom, what's sexual immorality? And I'm like, oh my gosh. I said, remember that other day when Mommy was married to Daddy and had all the boyfriends at the house? And she's like, yeah, okay, well that makes sense. And fortunately, we turned right into church right at that moment. And so we moved on to questions like, can I have beef jerky for lunch? And so I love that my daughter's literal, but the parental guidance message for me was maybe I should check my Bible next time before I give her carte blanche permission to memorize a chapter about lust and adultery. So that's my message. Cheryl Bledsoe.
I'm absolutely in love with the dog in the first row.